Hi, so today I want to try this new quint from DIOR. It's in their holiday collection. So I choose this one from the two they have, which is a silver one, which is this one, and another golden one. Because I think I don't have a lot of palette that is in this color story. But when this arrived, I feel like I have a palette that's pretty similar to this kind of vibe, which is the Colourpop Stone Cold Fox palette. If I would hold this side by side, I think you can tell they both have that mauvey, taupey, cool-toned, neutral kind of vibe, and they both have that very, very bold metallic silver shade, which I think mostly people just buy this palette for this shade. So my plan for this is, firstly, I will swatch this and put this on my eye and just trying to figure out the formula and how it works. And then I will find some shade that's comparable to the shades in this palette and also put them on my eye to see how actually they perform on the eye. Firstly, the swatch of this palette. I want to say this, the shade other than this silver shade is pretty sheer. Well, other than these two shades, I guess. The darkest shade and the silver shade are pretty pigmented. But these three shades are pretty sheer. This is a 2 layers kind of swatch, and this is 1 layer, and this is also 2 layer. But it's not like it's not pigmented. I want to get an even swatch, so I swatched 2 layer on this. But you can see the center 3 shades, they are still not like a very like a punch kind of color, right? They are pretty soft. But this shade is like just a light 1 layer swatch, and this is the payoff. This shade all over my eye, almost use this as a like a blending, a base shade kind of thing. Yeah, you can see it doesn't have much payoff to it, and I am rubbing pretty hard onto the pen. And this is looking more pink than I thought, because in the pen you would think it's more of a peachy shade, but on the eye it's more pink. I don't know if that's because of my undertone. I am quite a yellow, olive, golden kind of undertone, so a lot of shades tend to look more pink on me. Maybe that's why. I want to try this shade. This is a pretty like mauvey taupey kind of shade, and I am going to apply this shade all over. Maybe I should bring you a little closer. So I am putting this shade all over my eyelid, and this shade is also quite pinkier than I thought it would be. It's less brown, more pinky than it looks in the pen. Again, it might just because of my undertone. Because this kind of satin, more sheer kind of formula often looks quite different against different skin tone. This shade, like put in the mostly center. It doesn't add too much color to it, but it's a little bit more shine. Can you even tell I have 3 different color on my eye? I don't think it looks like one. So we're gonna use that very deep dark matte shade to give some dimension to this eye. But I actually don't want this eye to be too smoky, so just a little bit. it's very easy to blend as a shade dark like this. Now we're gonna apply this amazing silver shade on the center. And I am applying very little amount. So this is really the shade that gives a lot of payoff. This and the dark brown shade. This shade onto my lower lash line. Also a little bit of that deep brown matte shade. So now I have used all of the shade. I have some thoughts. I don't think you can get a lot of different shade using this palette, especially when you're using this silver shade. It just will cover all of the shade that you use underneath, and which is very nice because I want this shade to be very pigmented. I'm just saying, if you use this shade, it's kind of, no matter what the base shade you choose, it's not gonna look very different. You saw how I am applying the shadow. These three are pretty soft and they don't look very different from each other. So I think the looks you are gonna create with this palette is mostly decided by these two colors, because these two are the shade that's very, very pigmented. These three, if you would use them on their own, they are just very, very soft, taupey kind of color, leaning a little bit pink. Personally, I wouldn't use them on their own. So I think for me, this quint just serve one look. But other than that, I think this blends very nicely, even this very, very dark shade. And all of these cooler tone, the neutral shades, they don't get patchy on my eyelid, which often happens on me because, again, I have very warm undertone. So these kind of cooler shades tend to look very muddy and patchy on me, but these don't look that on me. So the formula is very, very nice. And also, if you love matte shades, I don't think this is for you, because all of these three shades, even though they look like a satin, when you apply on your eye, it's more of a softer shimmer shade, so you couldn't use these three as a matte, at least for me. So the only matte you will have will be this shade, which is pretty easy to blend, so I guess it could serve the purpose. But again, if you use this shade all over, the look is gonna be pretty smoky. With all of that being said, I don't hate this palette. I actually quite like it, because even though I couldn't get much variety from this, I find it's very easy to use and hard to mess up. Because like I said, no matter what you use, you probably ended up with the same look, which I like this look. And also the shade don't get patchy. I like it, I just don't think it's gonna be like a holy grail or something. So now, let's do some swatch comparison with this palette. Of course, the silver shade gonna be this shade, no other choice, so I will swatch that at the end. The problem is the center three shades, because this Colourpop palette, the finish is mostly matte and metallic, so they don't have these kind of soft shimmer shades. So for that, it's actually kind of difficult to get the exact shade. So this shade, the shade I don't know how to pronounce, pretty similar to this shade, which is one of the darker shimmer shades. But of course, this shade is a little bit warmer. The finish is different. This is more of a metallic, glittery shade. The other two, you can also tell from the swatch, they are not that different. Mostly just very, very soft, peachy, pinky kind of shade. I'm thinking, because this palette have so much mattes and metallics, if I would mix them it can create something that's similar to that soft shimmer kind of texture. So I tried to mix two shades. Maybe you cannot tell on the camera, but I think these two are quite similar. I mixed these two to create that swatch. So for this pinkier kind of shade, I also mixed two to create a somewhat of a dupe. And I think even though it's looking a little bit more pink and more pigmented, they are pretty close. And I mixed this metallic and this matte. And so for the dark matte shade, I didn't find something that's like the very exact dupe, but I find these two, which this one is a very, very dark purpley mauve shade, and this is a nearly black kind of brown shade. Mix them two together. I want to say they are pretty similar. So the last, of course, the silver shade. It actually swatched a little bit more bold, but the shades are pretty much the same. And if you would look from this angle, I want to say they are pretty close. For me, I could call this a dupe. I'm gonna apply this on my eye. I cleaned my brush. These are looking pretty much the same. So next is the dupe for this shade, which is this shade in the palette. This shade is a little bit warmer, maybe. Less of that grayish taupey kind of tone. And then I put this shade on top, I believe. So I am blending the two, and I don't know if you remember how it performed on this side, but I think for me, this is a pretty close kind of finish. And then I put the dark shade on the outer corner, I believe. So I'm now blending those two very dark shades in the Colourpop palette, and these are a little bit more pigmented, I would say. But the shade is pretty similar. To layer a little bit more. The formula of the Colourpop palette, it needs a little bit more blend than the DIOR shade, but not much. It's not like they go patchy or anything. You just need to blend it a little more. And the silver shade on top. And I believe this shade just make the look more similar. Maybe blend the edge a little bit. So I finished my look. I add some gel eyeliner on the waterline, some mascara, and a little wing. Use the dark matte shadow in both of this palette, and they perform pretty much the same. I think the DIOR one just attach or adhere to the skin a little bit easier, and this need a little bit more build, but at the end they look pretty similar, I would say. My thoughts on these two palettes is I really like this palette. It's very easy to use. I don't think you can mess up with this palette. First of all, these three shades are very sheer. They are not patchy, but they are a sheer shadow, so you couldn't really, get like a patchy look or an ugly look from these three eyeshadow. And these two are very pigmented and yet very easy to blend and very easy to adhere on your eyelid. Like I said, it's just a very easy to use kind of eyeshadow palette. I don't really regret buying this palette just because the formula and the concept all of those are very easy for me. If I would really want this specific kind of look, I will just reach for this palette. It's just there's not much choice of looks, different looks from this palette for me. They are pretty much just this one look. For this Stone Cold Fox palette from Colourpop, even though other than the silver shade, there's isn't a shade, you know, one shade that is an exact dupe for the shades in the DIOR palette. You are able to mix like 2 shades from different texture to create something very similar, almost the same with the shades in that DIOR palette. So I do want to say this is a pretty good dupe. And also you have a lot more choice from this because all of the, you know, tone difference, all of the texture difference, you have much more choice than you have with that DIOR palette. So I do think if you like this kind of color story and you want a little bit more choice of looks and textures and, you know, different tone, I do think this palette is a better choice for you. And even though this is a much cheaper than the DIOR one, the quality of the eyeshadow are pretty amazing. I want to say the matte shadow in the DIOR palette performed a little better than the eyeshadow in here, but you could make it work by just blend a little more or layer a little more. It's not all that difficult to navigate. I think it's pretty clear that I think these are really dupes. They're both amazing palette. If you just want a very easy, you don't have to think of kind of palette, and you really like luxury makeup, you don't mind to spend a little more on a little quaint, I think this could be a good choice. But if you would love to have more choices and spend less money, still get the same kind of look, I think this is a very, very good option for you. So yeah, that's my thoughts. Love them both. Thank you for watching. Bye.